Hi, everyone. This is Ron from POCculture.com. I'm here very excited with the Director of Visual Development at Marvel Studios, Andy Park. Andy, how are you?
Hey, what's up? How's it going, Ron?
Good, good. I'm really excited to be able to chat with you. Been looking forward to this for a while. It's like just about a month since the premiere of Shang-Chi. How's it been? How's that experience been for you, seeing how successful it is?
That's crazy that you say it's like a month, because it feels like it was like a long time ago. But yeah, that was an amazing. I've been to so many premieres because I've been working at Marvel Studios for the past 11 plus years. So I've been going to all the premieres for all the movies since then. But the Shang-Chi one was, I will say, and I told that to my wife when we were there, like it felt different, you know? I mean, obviously it was the first one, a proper one after the pandemic. But then obviously because of what this film means, and obviously to the mainly to, I mean, to the world, but obviously to the Asian community. So it had this kind of extra oomph that, myself, my wife, people around, there was this energy that it was just palpable. And I met you there. I always say, I think that was the most fun premiere I've been to. And I've been to all of them, you know?
Right. That's really saying a lot. I mean, but I agree with you. I feel like the energy there was special. The
Mm-hmm.
people there all, it seemed like they really had a grasp of how exciting this moment was for uh, comic fans, Marvel Studios fans, but of course, like, fans of diverse media and Asian fans. So just for you as a fan, I know it's hard probably to kind of remove yourself from your work, but as a fan, how much did you enjoy the film? What was the highlight for you?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it is hard to remove because I'm so like intimately involved from the very beginning, even before there's a script, and I'm working on designing characters, coming up with keyframes with my team, coming up with the look and feel of the film. And then from there, I get to, see every iteration of it. And even as they film and as they're editing, I'm seeing versions of the film. So my perspective is going to be so different and unique from just a fan, right? But as you mentioned, I am at heart a fanboy. I grew up reading Marvel comics. I ended up drawing comic books for the first 10 years of my career. So comics is in my blood, right? So even though I've been working here for 11 and a half years, I always say I'm first and foremost a fan. So but at the same time, I can never enjoy the film the way you guys can, because you guys are coming in fresh, right? Like all you saw was the trailers. For me, it's like I know everything that's gonna that's gonna happen, but I try to go in there and just pure enjoyment. And that's why the premieres are so much fun, because even though I've seen versions of the film, the final version is at the premiere with all of the effects, everything done. Sometimes there are little changes that happen at the last minute that I'm like, oh, that's new, that kind of thing. For example, like the end credits, like I that was new for me watching that. But yeah, I loved it. I went with my wife to the premiere, watched it. It's always best to watch it like opening weekend or at a premiere if you can go to premiere, because the crowd makes a difference, right? And this one, like, people were cheering, laughing, and oh man, that whole experience was just amazing to see the crowd reaction. So myself, I enjoyed it. My wife, she, I don't give her spoilers either, because I want her to experience it. So I get to live vicariously through her and just everyone in the audience. So I love that whole premiere and watching it for the first time, and then talking to Simu and Destin Daniel Cretton, the director, afterwards, congratulating them. Oh man, it was an amazing night.
That sounds amazing. Now, what's the last view and exposure to the film you had before its premiere? Like, what do you see? What's the last thing you saw, like the last version of it? Do you see a cut of it before its final premiere?
Yeah, I did see some early cuts of it, as they're going through the editing process. They have like screenings, right? So I've seen before the movie, at the premiere, that was probably already my, I don't know, sixth time watching it. But it's all different. So the final product that I watched at the premiere, there are changes from those earlier versions. That's part of the filmmaking process. So yeah, yeah.
Now, taking you out of like the Marvel and comic book world, were you a fan of martial arts movies, growing up, or even, you know, as an adult?
Yeah, my youth, I grew up in Southern California, right? So I was born in the States. My parents immigrated from Korea, and then I was born in the States, and then grew up SoCal. And then, so I grew up in the 80s, right? And then the early 90s. So I really heavily got into martial arts in my middle school to high school years. I even took a form of karate for, you know, several years. I even got my black belt. So, and then during those years, I was more exposed to like the Western martial arts. So early on, like Van Damme, and then Steven Seagal, down to Jeff Speakman. Yeah, and then that movie Dragon came out with Jason Scott Lee. And then, you know, I started discovering, so I came into the Asian stuff later, like, you know, around that time, but it was really initially more like Van Damme. Like Van Damme was my guy.
Yeah, Bloodsport.
Yeah, Bloodsport. And then once I discovered Bloodsport, I went, you know, all into the past ones, and Kickboxer, and that other one where he was like a villain, and then Hard Target, and just everything he did. I went to the theater to watch those. And then Steven Seagal came onto the scene, and I've never heard of like Aikido. And then when I watched those moves, I was just like, what is he doing? That is not like what I've never seen something like that. So I was fascinated. So I became a huge fan of his. And then just, you know, around that time, 80s and 90s, like martial arts was huge, right? And then I got into Chuck Norris. I knew of Chuck Norris, but then, you know, first got into Van Damme, and then definitely deep dive into Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan eventually. And then that's why I even loved the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, especially that first movie that came out, because I was just like, yes, everything. I love martial arts, and that, especially that first one, was very martial arts. It was a little bit more hardcore. The subsequent ones kind of got goofy. And then I was really into like nunchucks. So I had nunchucks, and, you know, I would record myself practicing. I was always trying to do splits. I was the guy like throughout stretching while I'm doing homework, like, you know, trying to do splits with my legs spread. And then as I walk around the house, and I even try to like turn on and off switches with my feet, like doing a kick. So yes, I was hardcore martial arts. Yes.
I love that. Now, it's amazing that you're a Korean American who didn't have to do Taekwondo. Like, I mean, I had to do Taekwondo. So,
Yeah.
did you ever end up getting really good at the splits and the nunchucks?
You know what? I was able to do splits like forward, backward, like front. I can like,
Yeah.
you know, I can go in the doorway, put one foot down, put my leg up, and then pull myself all the way forward. But then this way was always, I can never get fully, but I was close. I was probably like this far off the ground, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I always wanted to do that Van Damme chair thing.
Oh
But
my goodness.
I couldn't.
That's amazing. We're from the same generation, so we grew up on the same type of movies. And I feel like people who didn't grow up in that generation don't really understand how formative like those like Van Damme type movies were. And then when Dragon, the Bruce Lee story came out,
Yes.
it was so eye-opening, right?
Yep.
Because it was
Yep.
really like an Asian American Bruce Lee biopic. And I
Yep.
thought that was really amazing. So
Before that,
point,
Best of the Best. I forgot about that one. Oh my gosh.
yes, that's right. That's the
Philip
best.
Ree.
Philip Ree.
Yep.
He's a
Yep.
legend.
Oh my gosh. So
I
good.
love that.
So good.
That was really Philip's character. I'm so glad you brought that up, Andy, because that was one of the very few Asian American characters. He's representing America in that competition, and he's like the best.
Yep.
And that was really, so Philip, if you're listening to this, which I don't think you would, you were formative for many of us. So that's awesome.
Oh yeah.
So it really goes to our conversation, I think really points to the lack of Asian American heroes / superheroes during our formative youth. So what does it mean to you as an Asian American who grew up during that time to be able to work on the first Marvel superhero film that stars Asian superheroes?
Yeah, it means the world to me, because I grew up at a time in Anaheim Hills is where I grew up, And at that time, the common, I would meet people. There weren't many Asians, and definitely Koreans. The common question I'd always get is, "Are you Chinese?" No. Are you Japanese? No. What are you? I always got that question. So, back then Koreans were relatively new immigrants, right? So, I grew up, and then my parents, since they're first generation, they have accents, they have trouble with English and the culture. So there's this big cultural divide, right? Between, my generation, the kids that grew up here, and my parents' generation, who obviously grew up in Asia. So, for me and a lot of my peers, yourself probably included, there was a lot of shame, right? You're kind of like, you felt like the other, right? And you didn't want to be different, especially growing up as adolescence. You just want to be, just like quote unquote normal, right? So you kind of push down the Asian side of you. But then, as you get older, especially in my later years in high school and then eventually in college, that's when it happens a lot, where you start getting curious about your roots. And then that's when, I think I started making more Asian friends at that time, just, because you're just curious about your background and who you are, and you're trying to find your identity, right? And those are the years where I really started embracing my Korean heritage and myself and who I am as a Korean American, as an Asian American. So yeah, there wasn't a lot of representation growing up. I mentioned a few. And then, I was a big cartoon buff growing up, Saturday morning cartoons and 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock after school, like Robotech and, like Transformers, G.I. Joe, all that kind of stuff. And, there weren't many Asian characters, I guess. Robotech, there's Min-May, right? So it's like, I'll take that. I loved Min-May. And then G.I. Joe, they had Quick Kick, was the martial artist, of course. But yeah, and then working at Marvel Studios for the past over a decade, I've been so proud to be able to work at a studio who have been able to kind of impact, especially pop culture. But I've met so many people through the years. I do Comic-Con. I have a booth at Comic-Con every year, and I've met so many different fans of the MCU and people who have come up to me and like thanked me and said, told me how much the MCU movies mean to them, and all different types of people, right? Not just boys, like not just teenagers, like the whole spectrum, from youth, boys, girls, everything, right? And then parents, kids, like they could all connect, all different cultures. And especially in the recent years with, I've been so proud to be able to lead the visual development team on pivotal films like the first movie that had a title female character in Ant-Man and the Wasp, right? And then the first solo title female character in Captain Marvel. I didn't lead Black Panther, but I did work on Black Panther, of course, how powerful that movie was. And then, of course, this movie in Shang-Chi having the first title Asian superhero. So I've been so proud to be able to lead the team on these very pivotal films. And I see what it means to so many people having this kind of diverse type of characters. And yeah, I mean, look at the MCU, like all the different movies and types of characters, not only power sets, but backgrounds and cultures. And it's just so awesome to see that the MCU is just really expanded to kind of be what it is now. So I'm definitely proud.
And it's so important. I think I got asked a lot, and I think a lot of people just ask, what's the big deal? There are other Asian superheroes, there are other Asian martial artists, but I think you hit it on the head. It's Marvel has rarefied air right now. There isn't a more powerful and impactful IP, I think, in film and TV. And watching that progression and your contributions to that have been really impactful. And as a fan, it's been really important to see Marvel really pivot towards not just accepting diversity, but really going head on and embracing it, which I think culminated in Black Panther and Shang-Chi this year. So when Shang-Chi was first decided on by Kevin Feige and the Brain Trust. How does it come to you? Is it something where you say, I have to do this, I have to work on this, or do they come to you and say, Andy, we want you to work on it? How does that progress way in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, they came to us, the producers and Kevin Feige, and they always tell us which movies are coming up, right? So just like right after we finished, once Avengers, the first Avengers came out 2012, Kevin Feige came into our office and told us that we're going to be working on Guardians of the Galaxy, and so we start doing early design work, not based off of any script because it's so early, but they just want to start seeing proof of concept, that kind of thing, right? Blue sky exploration. Obviously we have the source material to kind of go off of, but we're kind of trying to translate that into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So yeah, they came at that time, me and Ryan Meinerding, who's the head of visual development. He's the guy that hired me along with Charlie Wen back in the day. But Charlie's no longer with us. So it's just me and Charlie that were leading the films at that time. So yeah, it's a conversation between me and Ryan, like who's going to be leading what, right? So I mean, he's my boss. So he gets first dibs. But yeah, it was agreed upon that I'm going to be leading Shang-Chi. So I was definitely excited.
Now, I know you go way back with comics and you worked on comics to start your career. I've heard you say that you're a big fan of the X-Men and characters like that. Shang-Chi isn't one of the A-list characters currently, even though he has a very long history. He's been around a while. And I feel like Asians have this conflict because he's a little bit of a stereotype, and I'm being generous there. And there's this conflict between another martial artist. So when you heard about working on Shang-Chi or them doing Shang-Chi, what were your feelings? Did you have any kind of conflict about working on this character and how you wanted to take it?
I think so much, I mean, it's a great question because so many times there's different angles. There's so many times Kevin and the Brain Trust and the producers come up to us and say, we're going to be working on this film, right? Or this character. So I mentioned Guardians of the Galaxy. So that reaction back then was just like, even though I'm a Marvel fan and I grew up reading comics, I was never a Guardians of the Galaxy fan because I never read even one issue. I've heard of it and I knew there was a talking raccoon, that kind of thing. But it didn't create excitement because you're like, oh, like that's okay. Right? And the same thing happens when they're like, oh, we're going to do Ant-Man. Even though I'm a Marvel fan again, Ant-Man was never a character that I was like really excited about. Or, when you're kids in the playground, you're never going to hear a little kid be like, back then, I'm Ant-Man, right? Maybe now. But yeah, so Shang-Chi was one where when I was growing up, I was aware. Back then I called him Shang-Chi, right?
We all did.
Yeah. But it goes back to a little bit what I was saying early on about the shame, factor that I think a lot of us had growing up in America, and the conflict that we have with, us being Asian in America. So the martial arts thing is something that we're proud of, but at the same time, it's been used so much to be a stereotype. So it's this weird dichotomy of like pride and shame, right? So yeah, you do get that. And I think I saw that a lot when I talked to a lot of my Asian friends, when I told them, working on Shang-Chi. There wasn't just an immediate like, oh my gosh, like this is going to be amazing. There was a little, you could see there's a little bit of fear, right? And they're like, wait, is this going to represent us good? Are we going to be proud of this? And yeah, I think for me, the trust has been proven through the years, starting, of course, with Kevin Feige, right? Like back then, like you have doubts when, after the success of Avengers and we're working on Guardians, the joke between myself and my coworkers in the Viz Dev department are like, okay, it was a good ride, but I guess Guardians might be our, swan song, because who's going to watch Guardians, right? And then, it premiered and it blew up and we're like, whoa. And then we're like, okay, Ant-Man's going to be the one that's going to sink us, right? Because like, it's called Ant-Man. And then of course it comes out and people love that character, and I meet a lot of people who said that's my favorite character. So it's just the history of Marvel Studios where, we're creating characters, franchises essentially, but they're making them. I think the success of Marvel Studios is it's not like the power set or what they look like, but they're creating characters that people love, So they might not have loved them before they watched the movie, but once they watched the movie, all of a sudden they're like, dude, I love Scott Lang, or I love, Hope Van Dyne. I never even heard of her before I watched this movie, but what a great character. I love Shang-Chi. That's what people are saying now, even though you've never read one issue of a comic, and that's, I think, the majority of people out there are being introduced to these characters through the movies, right? Of course, you got the hardcore fans who are aware of them from the comic, but yeah, so I think there definitely was some trepidation of like, wait, we've got to get this right, because it's so riddled with stereotypes and just it could be a landmine, right? You're just like, so you have to be very careful. But man, what Destin Daniel Cretton, Dave Callahan, Jonathan Schwartz, the producer, of course, Kevin Feige, and everyone, like, and I was there throughout the whole process, and we're part of it too, because we're coming up with designs, and we're all navigating the same space of trying to figure out, how do we do this right? How do we take something that has been riddled with stereotypes in the past, and there's some problematic things from the past, and we don't have to be beholden to the comic roots in this one more than like maybe other comics where you're a little bit more beholden to it. We're always respectful to the comic book source, but I think with Shang-Chi we had a lot more room to kind of, okay, we don't have to stick to anything from the past necessarily. We're open to kind of create new ground. I mean, that's why even down to the rings and what they do is very different, and the history of who Shang-Chi is and Wenwu and all that stuff is all, it's new, right? There's stuff that that's taken here and there, but it's overall we've created essentially a new lore, a new history of what Shang-Chi and that whole world is. So yeah, definitely couldn't be prouder. It's crazy. It's crazy, but that's the history of the Marvel Studios, what they've done,
That's right. What you've done, because I feel like the look, the designs, all of that plays such a critical role in introducing these characters, and in particular Shang-Chi, like you said, somebody that a lot of characters just didn't ever know. His original ongoing comic ended in the early 80s, and so many fans never even knew about him. So I was in awe, and I am in awe of the work that you and your team did in bringing him to life. I've heard you talk about some of the research that you did. You mentioned earlier you needed to get it right because of the pressure and everything that comes with this. Could you talk a little bit about what resources you referenced in coming up with his design way in the beginning, before any of the story or anything was created? I've heard you talk about the original comic design of his like red and black suit from the 2000s. I've heard you talk about Chinese history. I'd love to hear about your process of research and references, Kung Fu Hustle, everything that you turn to develop the look.
Yeah, I mean, it was a deep dive into everything, what you just said. Obviously, anytime we design a character, the first thing we do is look at the comic, right? So I'm looking at the decades of different ways he's been depicted. A lot of times he was shirtless, right? So I have versions like that too, that I can show eventually, where he is shirtless and just has the kind of the kung fu pants, martial arts pants, that kind of thing, to more doing traditional, very deep dive into Chinese history and just cultural stuff, but not trying to be completely too specific to one time period or anything like that. But definitely with digging deep into Chinese history, the Hanfu was something that was definitely an influence. The whole leftover right, the collar, and the Hanfu is also something that influenced the historic clothing of Japan and Korea as well, from the kimono to the hanbok, which I grew up wearing during New Year's, right? So that was the initial kind of like looking at that. Definitely what you mentioned about looking at the comic, the more 2000s with the red jumpsuit, the triangle black motif. And because the story was evolving and there was no like set, like this is exactly, where the costume comes from or what the story of this costume is, but I knew little things about like, oh, he's going to be coming to the West, and then, be going back to the East, like that kind of thing. So I was playing around with a lot of designs that, that kind of went from East to West, from modern to ancient, or more historic, right? So I did the whole gamut from very urban looking, more Western style, to much more traditional, Chinese kind of looks. And then eventually, as the story started progressing and solidifying, like what is that costume? That's when the ideas of the dragon, like the overall will be like a dragon scale, dragon skin that would be inherited from the Great Protector. So that's where I incorporated all that kind of stuff. The red, the black motif, the triangle motif. I took that, and then in my research, I discovered I knew about it, but I was referencing the eternal knot. The eternal knot, or the infinite knot, which is a symbol that's been used by different cultures throughout, hundreds of years, but definitely in Chinese culture, it's been used throughout history, from architecture to art to clothing, to just it's just a symbol that has a lot of deep meaning, right? It symbolizes the cycle of birth, death, rebirth. It's a symbol that is used for protection. And the one that really applied was when it's given as a gift, it symbolizes a connection between the giver and the receiver, right? So because of all these things, I thought it'd be kind of perfect to have there, right? Playing with that kind of symbology on his costume. And then from there, I wanted to give Shang-Chi a more, the martial arts kind of kung fu pants, right? And then I was really pitching to Destin and to Kevin Feige, like, because of his time in America, I wanted him, and I knew he was going to be given this. This is not something he made. It's an outfit that he's given from Tao Lo, from his mom, right? But I wanted him to have one thing that was uniquely his own, so that he can kind of maintain his American or his Western identity as well, because he's essentially Asian American, right? So that's why I fought for the shoes. I was like, the shoes, that'd be cool if he decided to keep it, Yeah, so I was really happy that stayed in the film. And then of course I knew like he's going to be getting, the rings. So that's, why you have the rolled up sleeves, making for that. And we did so much exploration because, there was times when the sleeves were even down. I did versions, and then maybe the rings can go even over clothes, right? But they like the idea of the rolled up sleeves. Yeah, I think that's everything, right? Yeah, when it comes to the costume.
I have to ask you about the sneakers. I'm a big shoe head myself. It was kind of an awesome thing to see him wearing, Shang-Chi wearing Air Jordans.
Yep.
How did that idea come into your head about integrating that part of like Western culture, like you said? Are you into sneakers yourself? And did you want them to be Air Jordans, or were you kind of just open in terms of you just wanted them to be sneakers?
Yeah. I'm not a sneakerhead. I do like shoes, but I'm not a sneakerhead. I can't call myself that. But I definitely like the idea of him having something that is his, right? So even if in my head, it's not canon by any means, but in my head, maybe they even tried to give him shoes, right? And then he could have been like, can I just wear my shoes? So it's the whole identity thing, right? Or he wants to maintain at least one aspect. So when you look at the whole costume or the whole look, it encompasses the best costume designs are the ones that tell a story of who the character is, right? So when you look at his whole costume, the shoes is his time in America. The rest, this part of the clothes, the pant, from the pants to the dragon scales to the eternal knot motif, that's comes from his mom, right? So his mom is a part of him. And then at the end, when Mu gives him willfully the rings, so that completes his look. So that's his whole story, is his whole history, right, of living. But going back to your question about the shoes, I painted, you might have seen it, it's on my social media, you can see it if you want, where it's like black. I didn't make it specific. So no, I didn't know it was going to be exactly Air Jordans, but they're definitely sneakers, right? Black with the white on the bottom with a little bit of red trim. So yeah, when I found out it was Air Jordans, I'm like, yeah, completely makes sense. But I don't know. I'm not sure if that was the costume designer, Kim Barrett, who did an amazing job, or maybe that was even Simu. I don't know. I'm not sure. Or Destin. It could have been Destin. Yeah, that's a good question. I need to find that out. I need to ask Destin.
We need to get to the bottom of that. Where the inspiration from the Jordans came from, but it was pitch perfect. And like you said, I think just from top to bottom, his character design just tells that story of the whole movie, about legacy, about reclaiming family history, everything you talked about from your personal experience of the shame and appreciation of the conflicting emotions we all have. And I think that his costume tells that story so well. I've heard you talked about the rings previously, and in other interviews I've heard you talk about you and your team had a lot of leeway in terms of researching how the rings should work, the different innovative ways they could be used, like as steps and things like that. I'd love to hear about your process of what kinds of, again, research and ways did you come up with in terms of deciding the design, the look, and the way the rings would be used.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that our department did, because as we're designing, they're coming up with a story, but nothing's solidified yet. So a big question throughout the pre-production was, what are these rings? What do they look like? But more importantly, what do they do, right? Because we know what they do in the comics, but I think early on, I think they kind of knew they probably didn't want to go in that direction, especially with the rings here, because it's too similar to like Thanos, right? We just had the Infinity Saga. And then early on, Jonathan Schwartz came to me telling me of an idea that Destin had about, what if the rings were here, like on his arm, very much in the vein of, what are they called? Hungar training rings. So they're actually called Hungar training rings, martial art rings, but usually they're used to strengthen the arm, to toughen up the skin, all that kind of stuff. They aren't really used. They aren't used for fighting, except of course for Kung Fu Hustle, and there was some other film that Destin saw. I think that's where he got that idea. But so that was adopted really early on. So let's have them here. But then our team, myself and the team of artists, we explored what can they do. So we did the whole gamut of like, do they have different types of powers? Eventually it landed more on, what you saw in the film, where they're just like, they're more projectile. They can essentially blast, but in a way that's more like because they're coming out, right? And then they could even be used more creatively to, like, as you mentioned, like step on it and then, kick from there. We explored ideas of, defensive ways of using it, offensive ways of using it. Yeah, I can't wait to like share with you all the exploration that my team did, because and then visually, we were coming with all different types of looks for what we knew they were here, but what can they look like? So eventually, Jackson Z, one of our artists, came up with that design that you saw.
Now, to that end about Jackson and Anthony, Francisco, Jaina, is it Sherman?
Yana,
excuse me. Because you're the director for this team, you're supervising these other designs and all these artists. What's that process like in terms of when someone like Jackson or Anthony or Yana, they come up with these designs, and how collaborative is it? what is that creative process like?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the pleasures of my job, because I get to work with some of the best artists in the world. And, so basically the way it works is, I have conversations with the producer, with Destin, um, Dave Callahan, and Kevin Feige, and basically saying, we have this need, we want to explore the rings. So, what can they do? So from there, I'll go to the artists, I'll gather them up and give them the prompt saying, this is what they're thinking. So let's start brainstorming. And we a lot of times we will have brainstorm sessions, so just verbally trying to talk about like, what can they do? And then we start bouncing off ideas of like, oh, wouldn't that be cool if like, you can, even though they're separated, they're all linked together. So it's like a linked ring, similar to like what happened in the end of the movie where Shang-Chi is holding on to his sister Xialing, right? And then it kind of grabs onto her arm. And then what if it, it can be used to like, that's how it can climb up, kind of very much like parkour style, right? So, or do like a big leap, just like what you saw Wenwu do and everything. And then from there, the artists they'll go off and start painting, come up with ideas. And basically because we all work together, I'll talk to them on a daily basis. I'll go to their desk, see what they're working on. Then we'll discuss, oh, that's a cool idea. Oh, why don't you try this or that? So it's kind of a very collaborative back and forth. And then we do that for about a week, sometimes 2 weeks. And then we have a big meeting where I take all the art that we've created, myself and all the artists, and I go into a room, a war room, essentially, of, all the leadership of Marvel, the director, Destin, Dave Callahan, and all the heads of all the other departments, from the costume designer to the production designer to VFX supervisor. And we present all of our ideas, all of our designs. And from there, that's where it's open for Destin or whoever to kind of make comments or be like, oh, that's cool, or let's try this or that. So it's there for discussion. And then from there, I'll get all those notes and from everything we've talked about in that meeting, then I'll go back to the artist, relay all that stuff, and then we do that for the next week, come up with new ideas, new explorations. Yeah, it's a fun process. It's a fun process.
That's awesome. So is there anything that you took to the war room that you really liked? I know you talked about you really advocated for the sneakers, which again, I'm so glad that you did and that you got. Was there anything that you also really liked that just got cut? It didn't work and it didn't make it to the final product?
That's a good question. Nothing's coming to mind. I'm trying to think. That didn't make it? I mean,
and it could be any character. It didn't have to be Shang-Chi's design. If there's anything in
yeah.
general you really liked that it didn't make sense with the story or with the evolution.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to think of any specific thing that I can give you. I mean, we did designs from, at the end of the day, like I can back every single design that Destin and Kevin picked, because from the Great Protector to the Dweller in Darkness to those what are they called? Soul suckers, those things, to the rings, to
Soul Eaters,
yeah, to Death Dealer, another Jackson Z design, to of course Morris and Razorfist done by John Staub. Since I mentioned the Great Protector, Tully Summers did that one, and the Dweller in Darkness was Jared Morantz. And then Yana Shermer did Xialing's, the white version of their costume. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of if there's anything that didn't make it. I guess the answer is no, because everything that did make it, I was like, yes. Because that does happen sometimes, right? Like, because you do, for any one design you see in these films, there are dozens and dozens of different versions. But at the end of the day, when I'm thinking about each of these designs, that's why I'm trying to process as I'm naming these characters. like the end result is, I can honestly say that's the best version, you know, like the Shang-Chi costume that I did a lot of versions that I'll show eventually, but the one they picked and what it became is my favorite one. Death Dealer, definitely, that was the best version. The Great Protector, Morris, yeah, I think Destin did a good job. He picked the right
Yeah.
ones.
Well, I definitely agree. The characters you're naming, everybody from the Great Protector too, especially in particular, this is a big respect to Jackson Z. I thought the Ten Rings, the especially Death Dealer and Wen Wu, were absolutely incredible designs that just knocked it out of the park. Very memorable.
Yeah.
So I think you're right that at the end of the day, you made the right choices. Now I know we got to wrap up, so I'll finish by asking you about working with Destin Daniel Cretton, somebody who I just respect his work so much, and I got a chance to obviously chat with him during the Shang-Chi challenge, and he's just so gracious. You've referenced him several times during our conversation. I've seen you on social media really be so complimentary about his leadership and the way he just led the whole team in creating Shang-Chi. Could you talk about working with him, just you and him, as well as him leading the team? What made him the perfect fit for Shang-Chi?
Yeah, Destin is amazing. I can't say enough about him, but yeah, working with him was another one of the great things about my job is, you know, for all these films, I get to work with all these different directors, right? And for this one, obviously, it was so special going into it, but it was very scary, right? So Destin, you know, he's up for the challenge, but I think himself, he'll be the first one to admit that it was a challenge, and you know, it's not an easy film to do. And you know, a lot of these directors come in that Marvel hires, and they've never done a big spectacle kind of film like this. But I think that's part of the magic, and this, it's not so secret, but it's the secret ingredient that I think Kevin Feige is aware of, that he gets directors and filmmakers not solely based off of like, oh, they've done all these big blockbusters, right? That's not what he's concerned about. They're concerned about, does this person know how to create memorable characters that you can love and care about, right? So he wants that human story, and so that's why getting someone like Destin, from his resume, you know, the past films that he's done, amazing films, but they're smaller, right? So yeah, Destin, he's such a laid back kind of guy. He's so laid back, right? Like
Hawaii.
yeah, Hawaii, if you met him, like you wouldn't necessarily like think of him as like a director, like Hollywood director, like all the stereotypes of that. So, but you know, so I got to watch him like, you know, navigate this. And it's always interesting because, you know, especially the first time directors for Marvel, like, you know, you're coming in and it's got to be intimidating, you know, because it's like, geez, especially at this point with all the successes. And when he was working on this film, shoot, I'm trying to remember, like 2019, is that when Endgame came out?
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, right. So he's like coming in, starting to work with us right at the time when like the culmination of whatever, you know, the whole, I forgot how many films it was, the storyline. So it's, man, talk about intimidating. But you know, he was a cool cat. He came in. I think him and Dave Callahan were really great partners, and Dave is awesome too. I think you interviewed him as well, right?
Yeah, I did. He's so
Such a,
great.
yeah, such a cool guy. And you know, both of them, I think their background, having that Asian American experience, much like myself and you as well, I think they got it right. So I think it's proven as they're going through it, as they're making these decisions. You know, I watched Destin navigate all the stuff from being culturally sensitive, wanting to be respectful, wanting to represent, you know, knowing the how big this movie is going to be or potentially be for so many people, right? And it's not just for Asians, but you know, just anytime you create a new Marvel superhero, you know, that the majority of the world has never heard of, right? That is just pressure galore, right? But then you have that added cultural aspect to it. But you know, his leadership, I mean, he was amazing. He is very collaborative. Like that's that's something that I love about him as well, because he definitely trusted all the people that he had around him, all the people that are surrounded, from Sue Chan, the production designer, to Kim Barrett, the costume designer, myself leading the Viz Dev department, Chris Townsend, the VFX supervisor, and then the leadership of Marvel, with Jonathan Schwartz and of course Kevin Liu and Victoria. I think it was just like a perfect marriage of all these different players. And that's just like in the pre-production I'm talking about, right? Because that's the part that I'm involved in. I know once they got into like the filming, and then that's when you get all the like the Marshall Club. I think, are they called the Marshall Club?
Yeah,
Like
Marshall Club, Andy Lee.
and Andy Lee and all that stuff. Like, wow. Like, I wish I could have been in Australia to see that stuff, because sometimes I get to go on set, but this time around, especially with COVID and they're in Australia, I wasn't able to go. But yeah, it was like kind of like a perfect storm of all these different components, puzzle pieces, and of course starting with the leadership in Destin. So yeah, Destin's amazing. He did a great job. I'm so impressed with what he did, and yeah, I would love to work with him again. I hope that I get to.
Yeah, we need it. We all need it to happen. I think there is magic there. So before we wrap, when will we get to see more of your Shang-Chi concept art? Do you have a sense of when you'll be able to reveal more, and when the book, The Art of Shang-Chi, will be able to be released?
I don't know. I mean, if you go to my social media at Andy Park Art, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, you could see I was able to post a couple. But yeah, eventually the art book will come out. I don't know. I don't have a date or anything when it'll come out, but at that time, that's when we'll be able to, release more. Like, I can show all the versions I did of Shang-Chi. All the other artists can show all the different versions they did. Yeah, I wish I could show it now, but I'm gonna have to be a little patient.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule, juggling so many things. It's been an honor chatting with you. I'm such a huge fan of your work, so thank you for everything that you did for this film and everything that you do. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And again, what you did, leading up to Shang-Chi and that whole, what did you call it? The
Shang-Chi challenge.
Yeah, I saw that. And then, yeah, Destin came to that, right?
Yeah, he did. He and Andy Lee came, and it was great for the kids were so excited.
That is awesome. So yeah, congrats to you, and you're doing great things. So keep it up as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right,
take care.
Thanks. Bye.